Thank you very much for coming, Sandy. We are here in the last Calder Gallery. After 3 years of a fruitful and I think very fascinating cooperation, this will be the last Calder Gallery in the Fondation Beyeler, by the way, or by the time. And
well, we'll see.
We'll see, yeah. It announces also the next big Calder exhibition at the Fondation Beyeler in 2016, so it's also a kind of beginning of something new in a way. And so
but that's a secret still, our project for next year.
Actually, it's not.
Has it been announced?
Yeah, more or less. But we can see this later. But I think it has been announced already.
Okay.
So and this last Calder Gallery is dedicated to the early abstract paintings of Calder, which are really crucial also in the evolution, I think, of Calder's work. They are announcing his abstract language, so also his early abstract sculptures, namely the mobiles, but also some of the abstract wire sculptures, and even the motorized panels in a way. So, and I think the idea was really also to present the paintings in a direct dialogue with his sculptures, really to see the very evident and interesting influence of his painting to his sculptures. Sandy, do you think, I mean, the sculptures have been made in Paris, the early sculptures, abstract sculptures, but also the paintings. And what do you think, what was the impact of this stay in Europe, Calder stay in Europe? Was it really influential also in the discovery of Calder's abstract language, or do you think that it could have been happened also in the United States?
I think these paintings are a very great definition to your question, because most curators chose these paintings. These paintings are from October 1930. For 2 weeks, he paints 19 paintings. And most curators choose ones that remind you of Mondrian or de Stijl, like this one over there. Which is it's kind of a misconception, because there are so many different styles. There's one that's sort of like Kandinsky, with objects sort of defining movement of musical sound through space and things like that. These two paintings are much more American abstraction, like this one's very much like Arthur Dove. So there are all these different styles going on in this brief moment of two-dimensional abstraction, his first abstractions really. So it's a moment of sort of, he's reconsidering his history, his history as an American and American abstraction, and his ideas about how to present a composition as influenced by de Stijl, but also you can see other things going on in these paintings. Exactly. Beyond the 7 here, the rest of the other dozen paintings have other stories going on too. There you can see the influence, the indirect influence from the constructivists. You see these black forms in space, these dynamic black forms. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, absolutely. But actually that was also the idea, to present Calder really also as a very original painter, not just as a painter who is just imitating other artists like Mondrian. Of course, the influence is there, but I think, and that's very interesting also to see the way he is so mixing or bringing together different inspirations in his very own language, actually. But however, I think the discovery of Mondrian's studio in Paris was, of course, groundbreaking also in his view or in his understanding of abstraction.
But we always have to put that in precise definition, because when you say that, people think it's the paintings and the works of art of Mondrian that had this influence on Calder visiting the studio, and that's not what happened, because he already knew the paintings very, very well. He knew Mondrian, he knew the paintings, he knew the vocabulary of Mondrian. So when he walks into the studio, it's not the paintings that have this shock. His word is a shock. It's this 5-sided room with cross light coming in, and then these rectangles for recompositionable experimentation, these colored rectangles, right? Squares, rectangles. And it was that every object in the space had rigorous definition, almost mathematical definition, had a purpose in its existence in the volume. Seeing it as a work of art, Calder saw it as a work of art. Mondrian didn't intend his studio as a work of art. He intended it as a sublime space. But Calder's response was, this is a work of art. And that was really surprising, that the whole volume was a presentation.
Yeah.
And then the second thing was, he suggested to Mondrian that these colored cardboard should be made to oscillate in motion, which Mondrian thought was a terrible idea. And then Calder continued to work on that idea. So right after that, he became fully abstract. He was pushed fully into abstraction and made those 19 paintings, which are, you've done an amazing job bringing them together with an abstraction from 31 and 2 from 34 that have a reference to these paintings. You can see the continuation of the ideas breaking off the canvas into the three-dimensional works and in motion. Even the one back there, Croisière, has vibratory motion, even though it's not a literal mobile like this one. It vibrates and it has
precarious balance also.
It's super precarious, and it resonates this kind of energy coming out of it that is like a mobile.
But you think that the paintings, the early abstract paintings for Calder, were really a point of departure, or the first field where he could make first experiments in this abstract language? But I think it's quite unique also in art history that a painter in a way starts with, or not a painter, a sculptor and a painter starts through painting to discover then what will become so typical and characteristic for his sculpture, so namely the abstract sculpture. You think that Calder was considering very much himself still as a painter at that time, or what was the meaning of painting in 1930 when he made these early abstract paintings? I mean, was he still in this? Was it still a period of transition from? I mean, between painting or sculpture, was he still considering himself as a painter also, or that was something that I was asking myself very often.
I mean, almost every great artist works in multiple mediums. You have to see the photographs of Ellsworth Kelly, for instance, to see its source material, but they're beautiful images. You know, or people that break out into sculpture that are known as painters and all that kind of thing. For my grandfather, he used different mediums as a way to explore a new direction. So he didn't go straight. He went this way to painting and then back to sculpture, or work in drawing, or even in jewelry, and all the different mediums that he worked in. That's why when BMW came to him in 1975 and said, "Will you paint a motor car?" He said, "Sure." It wasn't
open.
Yeah, it wasn't an exotic. He was, you know, he's at the time he was 76, 77 years old, and it wasn't a strange idea to try something else, try a new medium, you know?
That's interesting. But what is also interesting, and I think that we have some very characteristic examples to see that he was really also in search of a translation, a way of painting aspects into sculpture. For instance, we have the wonderful sculpture Black Frame, which is a kind of transposition of painting into sculpture, into also a kinetic sculpture. So do you think that this painterly dimension is always in a way present in his sculptures? Namely, I was also thinking about the importance of color, because I think Calder said that color wasn't important for his sculpture at all, and actually I'm not so sure if this is true, because I think that everything is perfectly balanced. Also, if you see this sculpture, for instance, the yellow with the red, the black and white, is really also has this connection also to these paintings. Do you think that in general there's a painting dimension in his sculpture, or?
Well, when he said the color was less significant, he was talking about really monumental, grand sculptures. So there were occasions where he intended something to be black, but in the end he made it red.
Okay.
You know, just shifted because of how it was going to be utilized, meaning it's how it was installed, right? He thought of them as utilization, though, the installation of monumental sculpture. Okay. So that was what he was referencing. He didn't mean these sculptures that I mean, this all in black would be an entirely different thing, and
Absolutely.
the color is a significant factor. It's great, though, if you look at the exhibition, because you see something beyond what's expected in Calder's palette. These weird greens, grays, browns,
that's true.
all these secondary colors beyond the primaries. This funny thing, it looks like a Richard Serra sculpture.
That's true. The curves.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really, I mean, it's not a landscape, it's a non-objective composition, but we start to, you know, define things or find meaning in them, but it's just amusing.
But even in some paintings you have, in a way, for instance, we have a little painting that reminds a little bit also of conceptions by Kandinsky. This is what he's actually treating also in his theory book, Punkt zu Linie zu Fläche.
Yeah.
And so in some paintings you even have a bit the impression that he's even also thinking about sound qualities also, and tries to translate this in a kind of very simple, reduced way through painting. Yeah. So I think he's really reflecting about different aspects that then will also become crucial in his sculptures.
It's funny because sound appears in Calder's sculptures all throughout his career. This work of 1934 is actually a sound-making work. The objects collide and it makes a composition of tonalities, an open composition of tonalities, which is a very exotic idea in 1934. I mean, his great friend Edgar Varese loved Calder's sculptures but hated the musical things. He thought this was not music. Even Varese, who was so forward-looking, thought that this was
interesting.
Strange. But the sound quality is very interesting. That you have a visual representation of sound. That's how we both read that. I mean, who knows what Calder intended, but we both see that. And then there's the actuality of sound and the actuality of motion instead of the implication of motion. So in the Futurists, you know, they wanted to see the back side of the sculpture and the front side at the same, from one position, the same moment, and Calder resolves that by seeing through the sculpture, see the back, see the front. But he does this literal presentation of motion in a mobile is, you know, so many people were attacking the question of how do you represent motion and time in a, you know, sequential-based image in a painting. And Calder does it in a literal fashion. He just has it move. Yeah. And that irritated people because it was almost like he was cheating. He went around the question instead of through the question. And same with the musical works, because they literally make sound instead of some sort of emotional depiction of how you feel when you hear Stravinsky. You know?
Yeah, that's true.
So he's funny that way and irritating when he invented wire sculpture, the figurative wire sculpture, very upsetting to people, there's no mass, and then irritated them again by making actual literal motion, and then irritated them again by making sound and so on. So he was quite irritable to the establishment.
Absolutely, and revolutionary, of course. And just another question: mostly of the paintings are still in the Calder Foundation. So I think just a few are in other collections.
Yeah.
What's the reason? Was it something that Calder didn't want to sell? Was it so important to him that he wanted to keep them? Or is there a reason why they are still so concentrated in the succession of Calder?
Most of my grandfather's commercial exhibitions were, you know, the works are chosen by the dealer.
Yeah.
So there are some exceptions to that. I mean, the first show of Abstraction, which had that sculpture in it in 1931, the dealer insisted that he include the figurative wire sculptures because he was very famous at that time for them. So all those portraits, you know the photograph, all those portraits up near the ceiling in figuration, portraits of Léger and Kiki de Montparnasse and Aux Enfants, all those people, these great people. And then the abstractions below, because that was the shift that was confusing. So I suppose the dealers weren't interested in trying to sell these paintings when you could offer the sculptures.
Okay.
And also they were a moment. It was very brief.
Yeah, of course.
It was 2 weeks of activity. Yeah. So, and then they were stored, you know.
But for Calder, they had an importance also. I mean, was he aware of really this, you know, this crucial moment also that happened in the 2 weeks that he was painting these works?
He did exhibit some of these paintings, but later. So in the Guggenheim in 1964, in his big show, is really when he represented more of them than anywhere else. That was also at the Musée d'Art Moderne. So they did have exposure. But they weren't shown by Sweeney at the MoMA 1943 show. They weren't chosen.
Okay.
So
it had to do also with the curators and the art market and the dealers.
But I think at the Guggenheim in '64, he himself was considering his history, and he chose those paintings to include in the exhibition as to show something about the evolution. It was really his choice, not Tom Messer, who was curating it at the time.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. So, thank you very much, Sandy. It was really great to see you again.
I love the gallery.
Thank you for your support, and yeah, I'm happy that you like it.